I want to start with two numbers. The first is $204,000. That's how much the average graduate of Whittier Law School borrowed to get their degree. The other number is $747,000. That's the median salary those same graduates were making. So you borrow over 200 grand, you come out making 40 grand. By one analysis of federal loan data, that is the worst debt to income ratio of any law school in the country. And it's not even close. On a standard 10-year repayment plan, that's a monthly payment bigger than a lot of people's rent on a salary that can barely cover the rent in the first place. And here's the part that should make you angry. Whittier doesn't even exist anymore. The school was shut down. And so thousands of people are out there right now in their 30s and 40s, paying off a loan for a degree from a school that closed its doors, working jobs that the JD wasn't required for, wondering where it all went wrong. Now, I'm not going to tell you where it went wrong. It went wrong on the day they said yes to a school they should have run away from. And the brutal truth is, almost every single one of them could have seen it coming. The warning signs were sitting right there in public data that anybody can pull up for free in about 10 minutes. So that's what we're going to talk about today. By the time we're done, you're going to be able to look at any law school in the country and know with real confidence whether it's worth your money or whether it's going to follow you around for the next 20 years like a bad credit score. I'm going to show you the exact red flags, the exact numbers to pull, and the exact math to run. First, I want to be clear about something. I don't want this to get twisted. I'm not anti-law school. I've spent the past 20 years helping people get into law school. I run an LSAT prep coaching company built entirely around helping people get great LSAT scores and great admissions outcomes. I honestly love this stuff, and law school could be one of the best decisions you'll ever make. And for a lot of people, it is the smartest financial move of their lives. It's the thing that doubles or triples their earning power and opens doors that stay open for 40 years. And the data backs that up. For the class of 2024, the overall employment rate was 93.4% within 10 months of graduation. That is one of the strongest legal job markets in decades. And so the people saying law school is a scam, don't go. They're wrong, and they're being honestly a bit intellectually lazy. But you should know that that 93.4% number is an average, and averages are misleading. They're misleading in a really specific, dangerous way. Think about it like this. If I've got one foot in a bucket of ice water and another foot in a bucket of boiling water, on average, I'm comfortable. The average is a comfortable temperature, but both my feet are in serious trouble. The average tells you nothing about what's actually happening on the ground. And legal employment and legal salaries work exactly the same way. The numbers are not spread out evenly. They are in two completely different worlds. There are a small group of elite law schools where graduates walk into jobs paying 200 grand a year, and they pay off their loans in a couple of years. Then there is a much bigger group of law schools where graduates make only $50,000 or $60,000 a year. They can't service their debt, and at the very bottom, they can't even pass the bar. Here is what the research actually shows. A Georgetown report that ranked law schools by what graduates earn after you subtract their debt found that only 7 schools in the whole country clear $200,000 net of debt 4 years out. You've got 7 schools like that: Columbia, Penn, Chicago, Cornell, Stanford, Harvard, and Northwestern. And if you're wondering where Yale and a few other big names are, it's because of what this metric measures: earnings minus debt at the 4-year mark. There are some elite schools that funnel a lot of graduates into clerkships and public interest jobs that pay modestly at first, so they don't top this specific list, even though they are, of course, outstanding schools. And the exact order at the top is not really the point. It's the shape of this whole thing. Now, the 33 lowest ranked schools on that list, their graduates earn under $55,000 net of debt 4 years out, and they've got lower bar passage on top of that. The same report found that the best returns are concentrated in about 20% of law schools. That's 1 in 5. And so the question is never, should I go to law school? The question is, should I go to this law school at this price for these outcomes? And you can actually answer that question with data. I've spent far too much time buried in the ABA disclosure reports. For those who aren't aware, every accredited law school in America is required by the ABA to publish detailed data on their bar passage rates, their employment outcomes, the debt of their graduates, and who they admit. This is all public information, and most applicants never read a single page of it, and the schools are counting on that. And so I want to show you today how to read it, because once you can, you're not going to get fooled. We're going to cover how a genuinely bad law school actually works, the money mechanism underneath it, so the warning signs make sense. Then I'll walk you through the specific red flags and the exact check you can run on any school. A genuinely bad law school actually is not in the business of producing lawyers. They're in the business of collecting tuition. Those are two very different businesses. Here's how the bad version works. The school keeps its admission standards as low as it can get away with. It takes people with LSAT scores and GPAs that statistically mean they're going to struggle to pass the bar. Now, why would a school do that? Because every seat it fills is a tuition check, and that's mostly federal loan money. For the past 20 years or so, graduate and professional students could borrow through a federal program called Grad Plus. And the key detail was that there was effectively no cap. You could borrow up to the full cost of attendance every single year, no matter how high the school set that cost. So a school could charge whatever it wanted, fill its seats with students borrowing the full amount, and collect that money up front, regardless of what happened to those students later. And those loans carry serious interest, too, recently in the neighborhood of 9%. And that interest starts piling up from the day your money hits your account. Now, there is a big change you should know about because it's happening right now. Starting July 2026, the federal government is eliminating Grad Plus for new borrowers and capping how much law and professional students can borrow federally, somewhere between $50,000 a year in that range, capping out at $200,000 total for all of your graduate education. And what that does is it creates a brand new risk for you, because at an expensive school with weak outcomes, federal loans may no longer cover the full bill, which pushes students towards private loans, which are worse in almost every single way that counts. They're credit-based, they have higher interest rates, and they don't qualify for income-driven repayment plans and loan forgiveness that make federal debt survivable. And so the trap just changes shape. It doesn't disappear. You want to watch out for any school that's quick to steer you towards a private lender to bridge the gap, because that's just a new version of the same problem. And so if you follow the money, the school's getting paid, the risk gets transferred onto you as the student, and if you flunk out after the first year, the school keeps your money. Now, if you graduate but you can't pass the bar, you're in trouble as well. If you pass the bar but you can only find a job paying 50 grand against your 180 grand of debt, the school keeps your money. There is no version of this where the school loses, only you could lose. Now, most law schools are legit institutions doing their best. They're not running a con here. But at the bottom of the market for the worst law schools, the schools that consistently have terrible numbers, a lot of them are running some version of this playbook. Now, I want to tell you about the infill law schools because this is the clearest case of this you'll ever see. There was a company called Infill Law, owned by a private equity firm, that ran a chain of for-profit law schools. There was Charlotte Law School in North Carolina, Arizona Summit in Phoenix, and Florida Coastal in Jacksonville. Now, their business model was exactly what I just described. They open the doors wide, admit huge classes of low-ranking students, they collect federal loan money, and Florida Coastal at the peak had one of the largest law schools in the country. But then the numbers caught up with them. Their bar passage rates cratered. Florida Coastal's bar passage rate fell to around 31%, meaning more than 2 out of 3 of their graduates couldn't pass the bar, which is the test that lets you practice law, and they all had the full debt load. And so the federal government cut off their access to student loans, and the school collapsed. Charlotte shut down right in the middle of the school year in 2017. Arizona Summit lost its accreditation, closed in 2018. Florida Coastal eventually was shut down in 2021. All 3 of them are gone now. And every student who took out loans for those degrees is still on the hook, holding a degree from a school that no longer exists. And it's not even just for profits. There was a school called Indiana Tech that opened up in 2013, spent like $20 million building it. It graduated almost nobody and shut down 4 years later in 2017. Now, the schools that do the hardest recruiting on the people with the fewest options are the ones that are at most risk of shutting down. They target people who got rejected everywhere else, people who really want to be lawyers and just need some school to say yes to them. And so the school tells them, we believe in you, come on in. It feels like a lifeline because they've been told no by everybody else. But it's a trap. You want to steer clear of that. Now, there are some warning signs that can help you determine which law schools are the predatory ones, which ones are worth avoiding at all costs. The biggest red flag is if their bar passage rate is below the line. The whole point of law school, the entire reason it exists, is to get you licensed to practice law. And to do that, you've got to pass the bar exam. So a law school's bar passage rate is the single most important number it publishes. If a school cannot get its graduates to pass the bar, nothing else matters. The fancy building doesn't matter. The mission statement doesn't matter. If you can't pass the bar, you wasted 3 years and a lot of money to not become a lawyer. Now, the ABA has put this in writing. They have an accreditation rule called Standard 316. And it says, in plain English, at least 75% of a school's graduates who sit for the bar have to pass it within 2 years of graduating. That is the minimum to keep accreditation. 3 out of 4 students passing the bar within 2 years. And so when you look at a law school, you're going to find 2 bar passage numbers in the ABA disclosures. Just Google X Law School ABA disclosure and you'll find the details. The first number to look at is the bar passage rate, first time takers, the percentage of graduates who pass the bar on their first attempt. The second number is the ultimate or 2-year bar passage rate, which is the percentage of students who eventually pass the bar within 2 years, including those who took it more than once. And of course, the 2-year number is always going to be higher because it gives you extra tries. Now, a bad law school is going to play games with this. They're going to advertise the 2-year number, which is the higher one, and they're going to bury the first time number, which is why you don't look at the law school's website. You look at the ABA website, which is the disclosure without all the marketing dressing on top. Now, in the most recent ABA disclosure data, the lowest 2-year bar passage rate in the entire country belonged to Cooley Law School at 57.47%. Their first-time bar passage rate was 51.54%, pretty low, the second lowest in the country. Roughly half their students are failing the bar. It was only behind Inter-American University in Puerto Rico. So roughly half of Cooley's graduates failed the bar on their first try, and even after 2 years and multiple attempts, more than 4 in 10 of their graduates still hadn't passed. And of course, the ABA noticed because they collect this data. In August of 2025, they put Cooley on probation for falling short of Standard 316. Now, I want to be completely fair here because this is important and it teaches you how the system actually works. Cooley fought this. They argued their newer numbers were improving, and in November of 2025, the ABA reviewed their case and removed them from probation after finding they had demonstrated compliance. And so as of right now, Cooley is an accredited, approved law school. They are off probation. I am not saying they're at danger of closing, but I'm telling you that when a law school's bar numbers are the lowest in the country and the national accreditation body puts it on probation, that's a red flag, no matter how the appeal turns out. You want to steer clear. Now, you also don't want to compare a school's bar passage rate to the national average. You want to compare it to the average for the state where most of its graduates take the bar. Bar exams have different pass rates in different states. A 65% bar passage rate might be totally normal in one state and a disaster in another. And so every 509 report, that's the ABA disclosure, it shows you the school's passage rate right next to the statewide average for that jurisdiction. If a school is sitting well below its own state's average, that's not the exam being hard. That's the school underperforming, and that's the number that should scare you. Now, the second red flag you want to look for, employment numbers. And this one's a bit sneaky because there are lots of different ways to present employment numbers. The school could tell you a technically true number that is deliberately designed to mislead you. A school will put up a big banner saying something like 94% of our graduates are employed. And that might be true, but what do they mean by employed? When the ABA collects employment data, it sorts jobs into a bunch of different categories, and they are wildly different from each other. The category that you should actually care about is called full-time, long-term, bar passage required. The ABA recently relabeled it bar admission required, but it means the same thing. You want to know what percentage are in a real lawyer job, full-time position, not temporary, and it should require you to be a licensed attorney. In other words, not employed as a barista. You want the number that justifies the degree. That's why you went to law school after all, right? Now, there is a category called JD Advantage. These are jobs where having a law degree helps you, but you don't actually need it to become a lawyer. And sometimes that's a great outcome, like a Harvard grad going into consulting. But at a bottom tier law school, JD Advantage often means something a lot less glamorous, a job you could have gotten without spending 3 years and six figures. And then there are part-time jobs. Those are short-term jobs lasting under a year. Then there are also school-funded positions, where the school literally pays its own graduates to work somewhere temporarily so that it can count them as employed on its report. They're looking to boost up the numbers with their own money. So if there is a school with a high number of school-funded jobs, that's a big tell that the school could not place its graduates in the real market, so they bought itself some better-looking numbers. Then you've also got underemployment. The ABA tracks graduates who are working part-time in short-term gigs, going back for another degree, or unemployed and still looking. Nationally, that underemployment figure runs around 8.8%. At a healthy school, it's going to be lower. At a bad school, it's going to be a big chunk of the class. So your job here is to avoid the marketing speak, go to the ABA disclosure directly, find the full-time long-term bar required percentage. That one number tells you what share of the class got a real lawyer job. At a stronger school, that number is going to be high, often above 80%. At a weaker school, it could be less than half, with the rest of the employed number padded out by JD Advantage, part-time, short-term, and school-funded jobs. Now, the third red flag you want to look for is debt that outruns income. This is the relationship between what you owe and what you earn. Your total law school debt should be at or below your expected starting salary. It should be 1-to-1 or better. And so if you're going to come out owing 100 grand, you want to be reasonably confident you're going to start with a salary of 100 grand or more. If your debt and income are roughly balanced, the loans might be tough, but they're still manageable. You could pay them down on a reasonable schedule and get on with life. The problem is what happens when that ratio blows up. Go back to Whittier, I mentioned earlier. $204,000 in debt, $40,000 in salary. That is a 5-to-1 ratio. That is not a loan that you're able to pay off under any reasonable time frame. Now, under federal repayment guidelines, you're supposed to keep your total debt payments under a reasonable share of your income. And a 5-to-1 ratio, there is no plan that works without stretching payments out over decades with interest compounding the entire time. Now let's get to red flag number 4, a class profile that's a warning sign. Every law school publishes the LSAT and GPA profile of the class that just admitted. You'll see a median LSAT score. You'll see the 25th and 75th percentiles, which means the score where a quarter of the class is below and the score where a quarter of the class is above. You want to look at that 25th percentile number because that is the bottom quarter of the class. Now, it tells you a couple of things. It tells you about the school. There is an ABA rule, Standard 501, that says a school is only supposed to admit students who appear capable of finishing law school and passing the bar. When a school has a 25th percentile LSAT down in the low 140s, they're quietly telling you that a school is admitting a meaningful chunk of its class from a score range where, statistically, a lot of people will struggle to pass the bar. And the school knows this, and they have the data. They know what the predicted value of the LSAT is, but they're doing it anyway because every seat is a tuition check. A lower entering profile is the school choosing to fill seats instead of select and filter out students. Low entering profiles mean low bar passage rates, which means the school is in danger of losing their accreditation based on future bar passage rates reducing over time. In other words, low numbers entering means low bar passage rates and low employment outcomes out the other end. And so if the only schools saying yes to you are the schools with bad profiles and bad outcomes, it tells you your application is not yet strong enough to get you good options. And so the single biggest lever on that by a mile is your LSAT score, getting that LSAT score up to get you better outcomes. We'll get there. The 5th red flag you want to look for is a school that is in risk of losing its ABA accreditation. If the school loses that accreditation, if they close while you're enrolled, you're in serious trouble. Because in most states, you can only sit for the bar if you graduated from an ABA accredited school. And so if your school's accreditation gets pulled, your degree could become close to worthless for the one thing you needed it for. And if they close mid-program, you're left scrambling. Now, the good news is the ABA publishes data on all of this. When a school gets on probation or found out of compliance with the standard, there is a public notice. Now, there are a couple of standards that trigger these notices. There's Standard 316, bar passage, Standard 202, whether the school has financial resources to keep operating, and standard 501 is about admitting students who can actually succeed. If you see these notices, those are signals the school could be in real danger. Now, the sixth red flag. These are judgment calls. They're not necessarily in the headline numbers. You could look at attrition, for example. The 509 report shows you how many students leave the school after the first year, and it separates those who left for academic reasons, meaning they flunked out, versus those who lost their scholarships. So, for example, there are conditional scholarships requiring you to maintain a certain GPA to keep the scholarship. But law schools grade on a curve. And so if the school gives a conditional scholarship to half the class, there's a pretty good chance a big chunk of those students will fall below the required GPA after the first year and lose the money. And that's how it's designed the whole time. You could see these stats in the 509 reports to give you a sense of how many students keep versus lose the scholarship. Now, I've talked through a lot of red flags here. I mentioned earlier the LSAT score as a leading indicator of the strength of the class. In other words, if you can apply to law schools with higher LSAT scores, you will get into better law schools, you will get more scholarship money, you get into schools that are more likely to get you better outcomes in terms of employment rates and bar passage rates as well. If you're not getting good offers, the single biggest lever you've got available to you is to boost up your LSAT score to raise your scholarship offers, get you into better law schools, and that's what I help students do. If you're looking for support with your LSAT prep, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. That is an open offer for everyone watching this now or later. I've also put together a free LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. You can grab that free cheat sheet at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube in my bio as well. It's a free PDF download. You can grab it right now. I'll put that link in the chat again. Happy to address any and all questions on anything LSAT and law school admissions. I see that Andrew was asking about Ave Maria Law School in Florida. Ave Maria is unfortunately one of the law schools that is not one of the better options. They have lower bar passage rates, lower employment outcomes. I would steer clear. I would look carefully at the ABA 509 reports for that school, and of course, any other law school that you're considering. I've done some videos on Ave Maria in the past. You can check my YouTube channel for those. Links in my bio on TikTok and IG if you want to go over to the YouTube channel. I see Ali is asking, what if a law school's bar passage rate is 1 to 3% lower than the state average rate? Does that mean I should avoid that school? I mean, 1 to 3% lower than the state average is within the margin of error, I would say. So in other words, that's not necessarily a red flag. Of course, I'd always want you to go to an above average law school rather than a below average law school. But if they're only a few percentage points off the state average, that's not necessarily a big deal. And there are some states where the bar exam is tougher than others. Like, for example, the California bar is notoriously difficult. And so if a given law school, their bar passage rate is only a few points below the state average bar passage rate, that's not necessarily a big deal. But again, why go to a below average school when you could go to an above average school? Cases where below average makes sense would be if they're giving you a lot of scholarship money. If you can go to that law school for a full ride, then it might be worth it avoiding taking on the debt. Ashley's asking, how much are the classes that we offer? So for those who aren't aware, we, of course, focus on LSAT prep. It's in the name, LSAT Unplugged. We offer personalized coaching programs, taking into account your starting point, your goal LSAT score, and your time frame, meaning when you're taking the LSAT. Then we'll create for you a personalized study plan laying out exactly what to do every single day from now till your test. It's not a one-size-fits-all, though, so I can't quote a general price. We personalize the program to the student. If you want to talk through what your personal coaching program could look like to get you to your goal LSAT score on your time frame, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally. The link to book that is unpluggedprep.com/start. Links below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. User 6533 is asking, what do you believe is the best law school for the money in Florida? I'll admit I'm not intimately familiar with all 200 or so ABA law schools in the country, so I can't tell you which law school is best or worst in any given state. I would always point you to look at the numbers yourself directly in the ABA 509 reports, look at the employment disclosures as well. And then when you say for the money, the question is, what exactly does it cost? There's no one set price for any given law school. There's the sticker tuition, but almost nobody pays that. Most people get some kind of scholarship to attend law school. And those scholarships vary. In other words, it's differentiated, personalized pricing based on your numbers, based on the strength of your LSAT score, the strength of your GPA. Kind of like when you're sitting on a plane, everyone paid a different amount. When you're going to law school, everyone also paid a different amount. There's no one set price. You get differentiated scholarships based on the strength of your LSAT score and the strength of your GPA. And so what it comes down to is when you apply to law school, let's say you were to apply to every law school in the state. Your offers come back. Different law schools offer you different scholarships amounts based on your LSAT score and your GPA relative to their medians. And so then you have some decisions to make, not always easy ones. You're often in this position where you can go to a higher ranked school with less scholarship money or a lower ranked school with more scholarship money. Kind of like sitting in first class costs more money than sitting in coach. If you were to take a flight on now defunct Spirit Airlines, you're going to pay less, but you're also going to get a lower service experience. So the question becomes, do you want to pay more money for a higher ranked, more prestigious law school, or do you want to pay less money for a lower ranked, less prestigious law school? And in some cases, if you're more debt adverse, if you don't want to take on debt, you'll choose the lower ranked law school, even though it has worse outcomes on average, because you are de-risking yourself by avoiding taking on the debt. Now, if you want to work in big law, if you want to work in a more corporate law firm, you might need the prestige of a higher ranked law school, and it's worth taking on the debt to go to those schools in many cases. In other situations, if you want to work at a family practice or a smaller firm, maybe you want to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money. And so there's no obvious right answer here, but all else being equal, I would choose law schools that have better bar passage rates and better employment outcomes. And once you have been accepted to a range of law schools, as I hope you will be, you're going to want to look up the 509 reports and the employment outcome disclosures for any law school that you're considering and see what their outcomes are, and then you can make a more informed decision. But there's no way to answer this in a straightforward yes/no answer. It's unfortunately more nuanced and complicated than that, but it's worth doing the research because this will determine the trajectory of your legal career. And of course, the way to put yourself in a more advantageous position to put you in a place where you're making these difficult but good decisions is to get a higher LSAT score, get a higher GPA. And so if you're still an undergrad, of course, focus on keeping that GPA high, raising it higher and higher over time. If you're finishing up undergrad or you've already completed undergrad, the GPA is a done deal, but the LSAT score is still the biggest needle mover you have at your disposal. And the LSAT is offered 8 times a year. Coming up, we've got the LSAT in August, September, October, November. You could take any one of those LSATs. You could take all of those LSATs and still apply to law school this cycle. And if you've already taken the LSAT and you did not hit your goal, I would encourage you to retake the LSAT for the simple reason that you can retake it in August and apply. The second application's open in September. And also because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest LSAT score on your record, meaning there is no downside to retaking the LSAT. If you do worse, no big deal. Your previous higher score still stands. If you retake and do better, congrats, now you've got a higher score. Just going to scan through for the chat for more questions, anything I may have missed. I see Ashley's asking, do I help with application essays? So yes, we do help students with application essays, but I'm going to caveat that by saying we don't focus on that until you've completed the LSAT, because your LSAT score is going to weigh a lot more heavily than your application essays. And until you've hit your goal score, the application essays are frankly a distraction from getting a higher LSAT score. In other words, I'd rather you have a point or two more on the LSAT and a less polished essay than a lower score with a more polished essay. The process is largely numbers driven. Excuse me. It's your LSAT score, then your GPA, everything else being a distant third. So first and foremost, focus on the LSAT. Once you've gotten that done, then we can switch gears. I see Will asks, if I have a 3.0 GPA and I score high on the LSAT, can I get a full ride? Well, let's define score high on the LSAT. Or if we're talking 175, 180, maybe, depending on the school, but a 3.0 GPA is going to reduce your odds a lot, unfortunately, because of grade inflation. A 3.0 is going to drag your application down a lot. And so I can't promise you a full ride. Of course, no one can. But if you really do want a full ride to law school, you're going to need a really high LSAT score to offset that GPA. But look at the medians directly and see for yourself. Look at any given law school, their 25th percentile and their 75th percentile. If you're below on the GPA, you want to be that much higher on the LSAT to compensate. I see a Smiles asking, is taking the LSAT in sophomore year of college too early? Not necessarily. I mean, your LSAT score is good for 5 years. And so if you take it as a sophomore, you can still apply to law school even a year or two after graduating undergrad, and your score is still valid. I don't think you need to take it that early, but you can. Keep in mind that when you're a sophomore, your time might be better spent maintaining a high GPA, focusing on your classes, enjoying college, exploring whether law school is really right for you, and then getting that GPA higher and higher over time. The LSAT's not going anywhere. You can always come back to it later. If you want to start studying as a junior, give it 6 months to a year, take it as a late junior, early senior, you could do that, and that would still put you ahead of schedule. IDK saying, guys, I'm taking my LSAT in 2 hours. I'm nervous but ready. Awesome. Rocket. So you're feeling good. Honestly, I would say just get off the live, meditate, go for a walk, take a shower, get a massage. At this point, you've got it in the bag. You know it. Just go out there and rock it. And know that for peace of mind, you can always retake if you need to. And so your LSAT score as a whole, of course, is important, but no one particular test date will make or break you because you can always retake. And some folks will like to register for an upcoming LSAT, say in August, for example, just for peace of mind. But come back, let us know how it goes. And if you need any support going forward, feel free to reach out and let me know. Hurston's asking, I'm considering going back to school after being out of undergrad. How do I study? So I divide LSAT prep into 3 major phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. Accuracy is drilling questions by type, building a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. Pacing is taking individual timed section to work on your time management, your time allocation. How do you divide your time up over the course of the 35-minute section? Then endurance is doing full-length timed practice tests. And so 3 major phases: accuracy to work on foundation and drilling, pacing to do timed sections, endurance to do full exams. If you're taking the LSAT in 3 months, for example, you could devote roughly 1 month to each of those 3 phases, giving that emphasis. But it's like the question, how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. You divide it up into chunks. And so in logical reasoning, for example, you've got 15 different types of questions: strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, and so on. Then there's reading comp to work on. That's a whole third of the test. Then you've got the pacing and time management, and finally the full-length exams. And so you build out a schedule for yourself to conquer each one of those pieces step by step. If you're self-studying and you want some support, you can reach out and book a free tutoring lesson with me. One thing we do during those calls is we discuss for you what a personalized study plan could look like, laying out exactly what to do every single day from now till your test. And if you're looking for more support, of course, we can set you up with a personalized coaching program, laying out a plan for you to hit your goal score by your time frame. If you're taking the LSAT in August, we're going to take a more intensive boot camp style approach with live coaching several days a week. If you're taking the LSAT in October, November, January, February, or beyond, we can take a more slow and steady approach. If you're just getting started with your prep, if you're looking for a quick refresher, you can grab a free LSAT cheat sheet I put together. It's a quick reference on everything logical reasoning and reading comprehension. It's a free PDF download you can grab in the link in my bio, in the link below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat as well. Cool Cat's asking, do you think doing a JD MBA dual degree would be too brutal? I'm not sure I would say don't do it because it's too brutal. I mean, if it's worth doing, I would say suck it up and do it because it'll help you achieve your career goals and help you achieve your financial goals, whatever those may be. Like if it's worth doing, it's worth doing. Just put it in the work and get it done. The question is if it's worth doing. That's the way I would look at it. In my personal opinion, from what I've seen, looking at the job market, looking at higher education over the years, my thought is that given the rise of tech, I think that MBAs have been devalued. I think MBAs are a relic of a corporate America that does not exist to the same extent it existed 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I'm sure there are people here who are more educated than me on this topic who can feel free to differ. If so, drop your comments in the chat. I would love to hear them. If you disagree, you're at the front of the line as far as I'm concerned. But my understanding is that MBAs are not as valuable as they used to be, and having real world concrete work experience is more valuable than having an MBA. You don't need a license to be an entrepreneur or to work in business. In contrast, however, a JD is still required. Law is a gilded profession, meaning that you do need to have a JD in order to be able to practice law. And so my question would be, if you want to practice law, get the JD. If you want to work in business, if you want to work in investment banking or finance or management consulting or whatever else you want to do, you don't need a general MBA. That's my take on it. Keep in mind, my focus is LSAT prep, so I'm speaking outside of my actual area of expertise here. I'm just talking about my perception based on speaking with folks. I would talk to people in the profession that you want to practice and see what they have to say about this. I see Dave is saying here in the comments, MBAs are easy, plenty of cross subjects. A general MBA is almost worthless. It's a starting point for innovation and AI nowadays. Specializing helps make it worthwhile. Okay, so Dave is saying here, a general MBA may not be worth pursuing, but specialized one may be worthwhile. So keep that in mind from a fellow commenter here. James is asking, why are you always live? Because I enjoy it. I go live every single weekday. And so, by the way, folks, for those just joining, I go live every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. If you find this helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't boost them because they can't run ads during them. So I do appreciate your support, spreading the word, sharing this to your socials, sharing it to your TikTok, sharing it in any Discords you're part of or Facebook groups, pre-law society, subreddits. The more this grows, the more I'll expand it over time. Just scanning through for other questions here. Feel free to keep them coming. Kay Thomas is asking, what GPA is good? Good is relative to what your goals are. So I would say, look at the law school you want to attend, look at their ABA 509 report, just Google X Law School 509 and it'll come up for you on the ABA website. You want to look at what are the GPA medians of the law schools that you're targeting, what are the LSAT medians of the law schools that you're targeting. And if your GPA is above the median, then it's good for getting you into that school. If your GPA is below the median, then by definition, it's below average for that school. It's not good for getting you into that school. And so if your GPA is below that median, then you have a special reason to want to have an LSAT score above the median to maximize your odds of getting accepted. And so if one number is quote unquote bad, being below the median, you want the other number to be above the median to be good to serve you in hitting your goals, getting into the best law school possible, getting as much scholarship money as possible. If you want my help getting the best LSAT score possible, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. I'm happy to help you out. You could book that free tutoring with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. And if you haven't already, you can grab a free LSAT cheat sheet I've put together. Quick reference, you can download that PDF at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. Again, below the video, pinned in the chat, in my bio as well. Happy to help you out. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.